What's going on? Welcome to Tech with Sean, and today I'm reviewing the 2021 HP Omen. Now this model I have is the 16.1-inch QHD version. It has an RTX 3070 and the 8-core 16-thread i7-11800H. This one here has the ceramic white chassis, which I think may be exclusive to Best Buy. It comes with 16 gigs of dual-channel DDR4 3200, which is user upgradable, and it has a 1TB NVMe SSD. This model here does have per-key RGB, but if you're looking at an Omen, you want to check the specs of the specific one you're looking at, because some are single zone, some have 4-zone RGB, and then some are per-key RGB. This RTX 3070 maxes out at 115 watts, and it has advanced Optimus, so you can run it in discrete GPU mode to get the best performance in games. The screen on this thing is actually really nice. 165Hz, QHD, looks really nice when you're playing games on it. Using HW info, I tried to look up the panel number of this, and it's made by BOE, but I couldn't find a lot of details online for that specific panel. It doesn't have much ghosting, the color accuracy is pretty good, and it gets plenty bright. HP says it maxes out at 350 nits, but to my eye it gets a little bit brighter than that. I'd say closer to 400. This panel also has G-Sync, which is a great feature, but you're going to need to be running discrete GPU mode in order to enable it. The speakers on here are actually pretty good for a gaming laptop. It's not going to be like a MacBook, but they're pretty loud and clear enough for gaming. There's a pre-installed Omen audio app, and if you go in there, it lets you set a custom EQ. I thought the HP optimized one sounded pretty good for general use, and surprisingly the country preset also sounded pretty good. It boosts the treble a little bit, so I thought that country preset was actually pretty good for gaming, like if you play first-person shooters and stuff where you want to hear little details a little bit better. As far as the keyboard and trackpad go, they're pretty decent. The keys might have a little bit of a softer press than some other brands, but I thought it felt really comfortable to type on. It has a 10 keyless layout, but it has the full-size arrow keys, and it does have this cluster of keys on the side with your page up, page down, home, end, and some other useful stuff. The trackpad is pretty nice too. I haven't had any issues with it. It is plastic though, and it uses ELAN drivers, so it's not going to be like using a precision trackpad that's glass or something like that. But I haven't had any problems with it, and it feels pretty good to me. One kind of funky thing is that the whole interior is black, while on this unit the exterior on the top and bottom is white. Now, I guess that, it's kind of cool, it's a black and white color scheme, but some people might want it all to match. I don't know. Some people could see it as a pro, some people could see it as a con. One thing about having a black interior, it is probably going to stay cleaner looking longer than a white interior. I know that the Mac that I work on has a white keyboard, and it doesn't look really clean all the time unless you go out of your way to clean it. Undervolting on this thing comes unlocked by default. You can use a third-party app like Throttle Stop or Quick CPU if you want to undervolt that way, or you could also use the built-in HP Omen Gaming Hub app. I'm not the biggest fan of having to use a proprietary app to do stuff, but there are some pretty useful features in the Gaming Hub. It has an automatic intelligent undervolt thing, or you can set your own custom undervolt in there. You can also make some tweaks to the performance and fans in there, so you can change between a balanced and performance profile. And then for the fans, you can set it to max, auto, or set a custom fan curve, which is always nice to be able to do. Also in the Gaming Hub is where you're going to set your keyboard backlighting options, as well as a graphics switcher. This brings up a thing that lets you choose between auto, discrete GPU, and Optimus modes. I will say the fans can get really loud on the max setting, but they're not too bad on auto, and it's nice that they let you have the custom fan curve too. Alright, now the I/O on this thing, there's nothing on the front or back. On the right side, you have two regular USB ports. I believe they're USB Gen 3 Type A or something like that. They make it confusing these days. And then most of your I/O is going to be over on the left side. And this is where you have your power connector, a 10 gigabit LAN, another USB 3 Gen a mini display port, an HDMI port, a USB-C, and this is Gen 4 with Thunderbolt 4, I believe. a mic and headphone combo jack, and a full-size SD card reader. So plenty of I/O on here, and it's not too bad for whether you're a content creator or a gamer. It's pretty easy to open up too. You just take the screws out and pop the bottom off, and once you're in there, there's another NVMe slot, and you can upgrade both of the RAM sticks if you want to. So that's kind of my general overview, but this thing's a gaming laptop, right? So let's jump into some benchmarks and gameplay and see how this thing can do what it was designed for. First, I ran 3D Mark Firestrike, and this is on performance mode at their default settings, and it got a 9905, and that's a bit higher than you'd get from something like the Zephyrus G15. Next, I went into Afterburner, and I set a plus 145 MHz on the core and plus 500 on the VRAM, and after that, we got 10,446. That's a pretty good score for a 3070 and closer to something like the Legion 5 Pro. First game I jumped into was Forza Horizon 5 here, and it's running really well on that 3070. You will notice though on the i7 that the temperature is getting pretty high. It's up in the 90s. We came in with a frame rate though of 77, and this is at 1440p on Ultra. Because of the CPU temps, I went into Quick CPU, and I set the long power limit to be 35 watts. And then I lowered the boosts a little bit, so the all-core boost is 3.8 GHz, and by doing that I shaved about 10C off the CPU. You can see here it's peaking more in the low 80s instead of the low 90s. The GPU is still utilized though, and we only lost 1 frame per second in the benchmark compared to the default settings. Next, let's take a look at Halo Infinite. Again, this is running on performance mode default settings. This is at 1440p on the high preset, and it was getting about 100 frames per second, so that's pretty good for a competitive shooter or something like that. Again, in this game, the CPU temperature is pretty high though. It's sitting in the high 80s and low 90s, and that's pretty warm. So I reapplied those quick CPU settings that I was using and went into another match, and you can see here again it shaved about 10C off the CPU. We're sitting at closer to 80-85 degrees instead of 90-95. Still getting good GPU utilization though, and it doesn't seem like it's hurting the frame rate very much at all. So if you wanted to try messing with a program like Quick CPU or Throttle Stop to save some temperature when you're gaming, you might want to give it a shot. Next we got Cyberpunk 2077, running this at 1440p. We have the Ray Tracing High preset selected, and then we're putting it on performance mode for the DLSS. This combination of settings is going to be nice and playable here on this 3070. It's getting right around 60 frames per second. This held up when I was running around, and also as I took a drive through the city, which is oftentimes when you get some dips. Next we got Yakuza 0. This is running at 1440p on the max settings. Now this isn't a super difficult game to run, but running on some hardware like this is going to let you pump out super high frame rates while it's still playing on Ultra. And I can tell you this looks and plays really good on this HP Omen. The next game we've got is Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and this is on 1440p on the high preset with the Ray Trace Shadow set to medium. And on these settings it kept it up over 60 frames per second. You can see here it was getting 60 to 70, and this is a pretty difficult scene when you have the ray tracing on. And then transitioning to this village scene, this is also pretty demanding on the GPU, and a lot of times you'll see a card dip down here, but again, it kept it up above 60 frames per second. Taking a look at the benchmark results, we averaged 83 frames per second, so that's going to be nice and playable if you want to run these settings on Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Next is a more lightweight esports type game. This is Strange Brigade, and we're running at 1440p on the Ultra preset. Now you don't really need a 3070 or a fancy graphics card to play Strange Brigade, but doing so is going to let you run it on Ultra while keeping it up over 100 frames per second. So for a shooter like this, that's pretty much the ideal experience. And wrapping up the benchmark, we got an average of 134 frames per second at 1440p Ultra. Now we have a little Rocket League, and a game like this is totally going to play on a 3070, and again, not a problem running it maxed out at 1440p. Won't take a look at this too long, but it looked and played great on this system. Next we have a JRPG, but one that has some pretty nice graphics, and this is Dragon Quest XI S. We're running this at 1440p on the max graphics settings, and it has a really high frame rate again. You don't need something like this to play a turn-based RPG, but you know, it looks really smooth, the animations for all the enemies look great, and the colors really pop on this QHD screen. Now this is Final Fantasy XII, and I had a weird problem with this. Take a look at the frame rate. It's jumping all over, it's hard to control the menus and stuff, and I have it set for 60 frames per second with VSync on. It was super weird. The only way I was able to fix it was to go into the NVIDIA control panel and turn on G-Sync. As soon as I turned G-Sync on, it worked totally fine, but without it, it was just jumping around all crazy. I was running in DGPU mode for these tests, and I'm not sure if it would do the same thing if you had it on auto mode, but if you do run into something like that where you're getting some crazy frame rates, maybe try turning on G-Sync. All in all, I like this thing though, and I think it's a good all-around gaming laptop. It's not, you know, thin and light and super portable with an 80-watt GPU, but it's also not a real heavy, thick laptop with a 140-watt GPU. Instead, it kind of sits in the middle. It's portable enough, it's powerful enough, and it has a powerful enough GPU. The gaming experience is pretty good, the speakers are nice, the screen is really nice on this model, the keyboard, trackpad, nothing to complain about there. If I did have any real complaints about this one, I would say maybe you could put the glass trackpad in there with precision drivers. Maybe you could add a subwoofer or something, that could be cool. But other than that, this has pretty much everything that most gamers are going to want in a gaming laptop, I think. Thank you for watching along. If this review wasn't entertaining, I hope you at least found it informative. If you liked the video, give it a like. If you have an Omen or you're thinking about picking one up, drop a comment down below. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you in the next video.